Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan El-Rom.
And I'm Rebecca Rand.
In our top story, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has given U.S. President Donald Trump a big campaign boost. Speaking at the virtual United Nations General Assembly, Rouhani expressed his desire for a weaker American commander-in-chief who would yield to Tehran's demands without compromise. Trump has applied crippling sanctions on the hardline Islamic regime for its rogue nuclear program, causing Iran's currency to plummet to its lowest level ever. Rouhani said the next leader of the United States would surrender to the resilience of the Islamic Republic. Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden was a staunch supporter of the Obama-brokered Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action agreement, which allowed Iran to continue its race toward fulfilling its nuclear ambitions virtually unchecked while receiving plane loads of cash. Clearly, the Iranian president is longing for those days to return.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the United Nations General Assembly last week, where he exposed a secret Hezbollah arms depot in the heart of Beirut. This weapons factory is sandwiched between a gas company and a gas station in the residential neighborhood of Jannah. Netanyahu appealed to the people of Lebanon, saying Iran and Hezbollah have put you and your families in grave danger. He also urged the international community to insist that Hezbollah stop using Lebanon and Lebanese civilians as human shields. The Israeli premier praised President Trump for standing strong against Iranian aggression and chided the Security Council for doing absolutely nothing when presented with irrefutable evidence of Iran's brazen nuclear violations. He called on all members of the Security Council to take a stand now with the United States against Iranian aggression and its rogue nuclear program.
Credit card giants Visa and MasterCard have been warned against working with Arab banks that are funding Palestinian terror. According to Palestinian Media Watch, an Arabic language watchdog organization, the companies have been notified that continued business with the institutions in question puts them at risk of legal liability for funding terrorism. They've also been advised not to provide services to a new bank being created by the Palestinian Authority, which is owned by the PLO terror group. Maurice Hirsch, the director of legal strategies at Palestinian Media Watch, told the Jerusalem Post that to date, credit card companies have avoided liability for providing financial support to terrorists by hiding behind banks who are held to high standards. He said the banks operating in the Palestinian Authority clearly flout the internationally recognized and accepted anti-terror regulations.
The Trump administration is planning to mediate negotiations with Israel and Lebanon over their maritime border. This comes after a decade-long impasse resulting in increasing tensions between the nations, which do not hold diplomatic relations and are technically in a state of war. Both countries claim the 330 square miles of the Mediterranean Sea as being within their jurisdiction. This dispute has heated up since Israel discovered several natural gas fields off the coast of Haifa, and both states want to establish expanded offshore drilling rights. Jerusalem has offered to split the disputed area in a 58-42 ratio in favor of Beirut, but the Iranian-backed proxy army Hezbollah, which rules Lebanon, has so far prevented the two countries from resolving the conflict. The negotiations are expected to be brokered by a senior American official, as well as a UN rapporteur in mid-October in the southern Lebanese border town of Naqoura, where UNIFIL is headquartered.
The former acting director of U.S. intelligence has asked the International Olympic Committee to ban Iran for the brutal execution of wrestler Naveed Afkari. We reported on Afkari's arrest after participating in popular protest against government corruption in the fanatical Islamic State. Iran ignored a worldwide outcry and swiftly carried out the death sentence. Richard Grinnell asked the IOC to consider Tehran's systematic human rights abuses and ban the Islamic Republic from the international sporting competition. Even before Afkari's murder, the head of the International Olympic Committee faced harsh criticism for allowing Tehran to participate without penalties, despite Iranian athletes refusing to compete against Israelis.
Jews throughout the world are outraged that the Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden compared President Trump to a high-ranking Nazi official. The Republican Jewish Committee is demanding that Biden apologize for likening the president to Hitler's chief propagandist, Joseph Goebbels. Matt Brooks, the executive director of the RJC, said instead of engaging in a debate on policy, Joe Biden has descended to name-calling and Holocaust references. There is no place in political discourse for Holocaust imagery or comparing candidates to Nazis. It is offensive, and it demeans the memory of the Holocaust, the suffering of the victims, and the lessons we must learn from that terribly dark chapter in history.
An Israeli-developed instant coronavirus test will be deployed in airports throughout Europe. The self-service gargle test is currently in use in 2 European airports. A newly signed agreement with the airport security giant ICTS Europe, which operates in more than 120 airports in 23 countries, has placed the test in the position to become the de facto solution for air travel. Israeli startup NewSite and Sheba Medical Center joined forces to form VirusSite Diagnostic. Together they created a non-invasive, self-administered gargle test which can be integrated into self-service passenger stands already installed in airports. The makers believe that the process will be no more inconvenient than fingerprint checks.
Jews around the world are celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles, which began at sundown on Friday night. The book of Leviticus, chapter 23, details the commandment to dwell in tabernacles for 7 days as a reminder of the exodus from Egypt and the 40 years spent wandering through the desert. It is a truly special time in Israel where makeshift booths can be seen in yards, porches, and patios. The Bible instructs Jews to take up the 4 species, the lulav or palm branch, citron, myrtle, and willow branches. Unfortunately, the coronavirus pandemic has prevented hundreds of thousands of Christians from fulfilling Zechariah's prophecy, which says, "It shall come to pass that all nations would come up to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles." The main pilgrimage and prayer events for Christians have gone online, offering Christians a virtual Sukkot experience. Yochanan has more on that.
That's right, Rebecca. The International Christian Embassy Jerusalem, which hosts the State of Israel's largest annual tourist event, has been forced to hold the Feast of Tabernacles virtually this year. Israel has instituted a nationwide lockdown over the holiday of Sukkot, and the borders of the Jewish state remain closed to non-residents. The ICEJ has opened up their event to Christians around the world online so they can experience the joy of Sukkot remotely. The International Day of Prayer for the Peace of Jerusalem has also organized a massive online prayer event that includes 175 nations. More than 1,500 Christian leaders will be cooperating to mobilize millions to collectively pray for the peace of Jerusalem on the first Sunday of October.
The Israel Allies Foundation has published a list of Israel's top 50 allies in honor of Sukkot. This holiday usually provides Christians and Jews an opportunity to fellowship together in the holy city of Jerusalem. Being unable to celebrate with Israel's closest allies in person inspired the IAF to create a list of Christian leaders who conveyed their deep love and support to the State of Israel. IAF President Josh Reinstein explained that faith-based diplomacy has empowered Israel and its leadership to reach new heights, and it would not have been possible without the hard work and dedication of these 50 unique individuals. Reinstein said, "Recognizing the heroic work of our Christian supporters is an important display of our gratitude towards them. It is only due to the Christian political support for Israel that Israel is welcoming embassies to Jerusalem and is now in the position to negotiate new peace deals on the basis of peace through strength."
We are living in mysterious yet miraculous times. We've witnessed the most remarkable fulfillment of biblical prophecy, the Jewish people's return to Israel, and the prosperity and contributions of this tiny country in such a short time. Yet we've also seen an unexpected rise in anti-Semitism, which takes the form of anti-Zionism, and alliances between groups that are fighting against the most fundamental biblical values. In the book Titus, Trump, and the Triumph of Israel, Josh Reinstein answers important questions to clarify what has driven political action from the time that the Roman Emperor Titus destroyed Jerusalem until today, when President Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Get your copy today and learn how faith-based diplomacy has changed the world. To order your advance copy, go to triumphofisrael.com.
That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Sam Grundwerg. He's the world chairman of Keren HaYesod. Sam, thanks for being on the show.
Josh, it's great to be here again with you.
Great having you back on the show. As you know, Keren HaYesod is a major part of Israel Now News, and Aliyah is what you guys are involved in. What's the newest thing coming in online for Aliyah today?
Well, thank you, Josh. As you know, during this pandemic, there's been a lot of talk and anticipation about a huge wave of new Aliyah, of new immigration. And for our organization, which I have the privilege to be at the head of, we, as a national institution for Israel, established 100 years ago, we've had the privilege and the blessing to have brought, over all of those years and decades, 3.5 million new immigrants to Israel over the years. And one of the most exciting things is the fact that right now there's a huge demand in coming on Aliyah, but one of the most amazing things is the talk of Aliyah and renewing the Aliyah efforts from Ethiopia.
Yeah, we've seen this during the coronavirus pandemic. Requests for Aliyah is through the roof. And as you just mentioned, there was actually a decision of the Knesset on Ethiopian Aliyah. Can you talk about that?
That's right, Josh. As you know, this relatively new Israeli government, we have a new Minister of Aliyah and Integration. It's really an unbelievable personal story. Her name is Minister Pnina Tamano-Shata. She is in her late 30s, and she herself was born in Ethiopia and made Aliyah and came to Israel when her family when she was 3 years old. She's the first Ethiopian minister in Israeli history. And it's really an amazing story. As you may know, and your viewers may know, today there are 8,000 Ethiopian Jews still in Ethiopia. They come from the tribe of Dan, or Dan, and they were exiled from Jerusalem after the destruction of the first temple. And it's an amazing story to think about how they preserved their Judaism after 2,000 years. It's almost like a manifestation of the entire story of the miracle of modern day Israel and the modern day Jewish homeland, and also why the relationship between Christian Zionists and Israel and Jews today are so important. So this new government and the new minister, who herself is from Ethiopia, just came out with a plan and with an announcement in the last several weeks saying that she has every intention to bring those remaining 8,000 Ethiopian Jews back to Israel, back home to their ancestral homeland over the next 2 years, which involves bringing about 4,500 of them still by the end of this year, in the year 2020, and the remainder next year.
Amazing. This must be music to your ears. You've been working very hard on this issue to get the Ethiopian Jews to come home, the final amount there, to get back to the land of Israel. Why was this so important for you?
Well, first of all, my own story, it was very important. I grew up in a Zionist Jewish home in South Florida. I grew up in Miami Beach, and very much influenced by my own father's Zionism. And I fulfilled a dream for myself of coming on Aliyah, or immigrating to Israel when I was 17, and then serving as a lone soldier. And now having the privilege to be the world chairman of an organization which is one of Israel's national institutions, that one of its chief missions is to bring Aliyah and to bring Olim and new immigrants to Israel. It's an amazing fulfillment of a dream, and it's also helping fulfill biblical prophecy.
We see that Bible-believing Christians are very involved specifically with Ethiopian Aliyah. I think all the flights from Ethiopian Aliyah in the last few years have been from Christian organizations themselves. Why do Christians see such an opportunity to help the people of Ethiopia, and why are they getting involved in such a strong way?
I think it just shows how living in today's world, we're literally at the gates of a historic era of biblical proportions. For Christian Zionists and for Jews and for Israelis, the fact that only in the last 72 years we're able to come back home after a couple thousand years and reestablish the Jewish homeland and bring back the people of Israel and the Jewish people to the land of Israel. It's something that is part of what, first of all, Christians in America and, of course, Israel being two countries which are rooted in Judeo-Christian values and principles. So I think it speaks to our people, it speaks to our Christian friends, and it's something that everyone can be a part of today.
We're also seeing a lot of support from Christians outside of America. You know, England is a major supporter, Hong Kong, even Christians from Africa are getting involved in this. Why does this speak to this global movement of Christians helping Ethiopian Jews make Aliyah back home?
I think the whole sense, when we think back only in the last several decades, whether it goes back to the 1980s with Operation Moses or the early 1990s with Operation Solomon, it shows how we're witnessing miracles today, and I think people are realizing that they can be a part of that miracle. It's what I call being part of the Esther moment for all of us, for our Christian friends and for our Jewish supporters as well. This is really our Esther moment, and not to miss that opportunity.
It was a big announcement in Israel. We just mentioned in the Knesset, they decided to bring everyone home. But this is at a time where there's so much Aliyah coming from other places around the world. You're the one who's responsible for raising all the funds for it. How are you going to meet the financial need?
It's a huge challenge. In order to do this and bring these thousands and thousands, and just to give you an idea, last year, in 2019, we brought 35,000 Olim from all around the world, and they're talking about huge increases. The resources necessary are tremendous. So we're looking to our friends around the world, our Christian friends around the world, our Jewish friends around the world, and others, and we're asking them to not miss this moment, not to miss this opportunity to be part of something special, to be part of the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. And it's going to take a lot, and we're asking for everybody to pitch in.
It says in the Bible that the nations will carry their home their sons in your arms and your daughters on their backs. When Christians support Keren Yesod, did they really see that as them being part of the fulfillment of biblical prophecy?
Absolutely. I've had the opportunity to travel around the world, not just in the United States, but as you said, in the Far East and also in Europe. And I really believe that by supporting Keren Yesod, by helping to bring these Jews who have been literally dreaming for generations and generations to come back home. And I've seen that our Christian supporters, through being part of that process, it energizes them and it absolutely makes them part of the fulfillment of that biblical prophecy.
Keren Yesod has always been a Jewish club, Albert Einstein and the big founders of Israel. Some of the richest Jewish families stand with Keren Yesod and support them. But you made it a very big priority to open it up to also Christians, to get Christians involved with this fulfillment of biblical prophecy. What does that mean to you?
Absolutely. I feel very proud that myself, also together with my predecessor, that we've started that process. The truth is it may not be as well known, but even going back to the early 1900s, we had one of the first Christian Zionists, John Henry Patterson, who actually worked for Keren Yesod as an emissary and went to the United States and other places around the world. So it is deeply rooted, and I think it's very important. I think what we're witnessing just in the last few years with the opportunities, think about this, the recognition of Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, and bringing back all of these thousands and thousands of Jews home, whether it's on rescue missions or relief missions. As you said, it does take a lot of resources, and so we're going to need the help of our friends. But these are historic times and times that we should not miss.
Sam, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
Well, my first message is a message of gratitude. I first want to say thank you to all our Christian Zionist friends all around the world, first of all, for praying for us, for supporting us, whether it's with your financial resources, whether it's with your prayers, diplomatically, and with your moral support. And my other message is that you will be blessed. You'll be blessed from Israel, from here in Jerusalem, and come be a part of this. Let's not miss the opportunity to be a part of these historic times, really of biblical proportions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, wishing you a very happy Feast of Tabernacles. Now back to the studio.
Up next, the return to Zion with Keren Yesod.
Shalom and welcome to the Return to Zion with Keren HaYesod United Israel Appeal. I'm Sam Grundwerg, World Chairman of Keren HaYesod, the leading official fundraising organization for the State of Israel. The story of the Ethiopian Jews returning to their homeland have moved people around the world. Let's listen to the story of two individuals who are making a profound difference. God bless you from Jerusalem.
A mission to Ethiopia. Through their deep faith, Roy and Yuklin Chen, a devout Bible-believing Christian couple from Hong Kong, received a sign from heaven, revealing their personal mission in life. They found it in an amazing series of inspired events that took them on a transformative spiritual journey along a road strewn with signs and wonders to help realize God's promise to return the exiled people of Israel back to their ancestral homeland.
In 2006, on November the 11th at 5 o'clock in the morning, the Lord woke me up and started to tell me to look up different books, chapter 11, verse 11, which is that He will bring His children from all corners of the world back home, including places like Cush. After we found out that Cush is Ethiopia, and I was praying, meditating on Psalm 87, suddenly the Lord says, bring the Ethiopian Jews back.
They traveled all the way from Hong Kong to Ethiopia, where they were joined by Eliezer Moody Sandberg, World Chairman of Keren HaYesod, who is tasked with bringing the rest of the Ethiopian Jews back to Israel.
After 2 years of hearing from God, a specific assignment that we now have a chance to actually participate in something so historically significant. We felt the Lord telling us to actually meet with the remaining Ethiopian Jews, to encourage them, to remind them that Father God, Abba, has not forgotten them, but that in His perfect time, He will bring them back, His sons and daughters.
The Lord says, stop everything and write everything down. And He gave us Isaiah 17, 18, and 19. And then He says, call the world 777. We didn't understand what it meant. This year is the year 5777. So we wondered whether this is the year that we are to call the world to support the Aliyah of the Felash Mura and of the other lost tribes.
The Israeli government has just authorized the movement of, at the time, the last batch of Ethiopian Jews back to Israel. And the operation was going to be called Operation Wings of the Dove. This is the piece of jewelry that I picked up for my wife. And the name of the operation was called the Wings of a Dove. I showed it to everyone at the meeting, and everyone was totally shocked. All of us started to weep. This was a divine appointment.
Inspired by the Ethiopian Jewish community's love for the God, state, and people of Israel, this journey strengthened their determination to fulfill this biblical prophecy and inspire others to help bring an exile of almost 3,000 years to a final close.
We feel very blessed to be here with you because we were sent to come here. We just want to make an appeal if we can and ask that you, as you watch this and hear our story, that you would also first pray for the Ethiopian Jews, that they would be able to be brought back quickly, safely, and that secondly, whether God has called you also to support this movement.
We have visited their camp in Gondor. Many of them have died while waiting to go home.
Together, we will bring all our brothers and sisters back to Jerusalem. Toda Rabba. Thank you very much.
Thus said the Lord God, behold, I will lift up my hand to the nations and set up my standard to the peoples. And they will bring your sons into their bosom, and your daughters will be carried on their shoulders. Isaiah chapter 49, verse 22.
Due to the coronavirus pandemic, we're expecting a massive wave of Aliyah from Jewish communities all around the world. Help us bring them home, and let's bless Israel together.
To donate and get information, visit khisrael.org.
The Middle East is not exactly renowned for producing good news, and few expected this year to be any different. You know, the pandemic virus is ravaging our part of the world like everywhere else. But I am pleased to report to you that this year I can tell you about good news from the Middle East. In fact, I can report two pieces of good news. Earlier this month, at a White House ceremony hosted by President Trump, Israel signed historic agreements with the United Arab Emirates and the Kingdom of Bahrain. This was the first peace treaty between Israel and an Arab country in over a quarter of a century. And it was the first time peace agreements between Israel and two Arab countries were signed on the same day. These new agreements will bring our peoples the blessings of peace and the enormous benefits that come with more trade, more investment, more commerce, transportation, tourism, increased cooperation in so many areas. I also have no doubt that more Arab and Muslim countries will be joining the circle of peace soon, very soon. This good news about peace came about because of a clear break with the failed strategies of the past. For far too long, the Palestinians effectively wielded the veto on peace between Israel and the broader Arab world, instead of working for a realistic solution that could happen. Thankfully, President Trump chose a different path to peace, a path anchored in reality. He recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. He recognized Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and he put forward a realistic peace plan that recognizes Israel's right, addresses Israel's security needs, and provides the Palestinians with a dignified, realistic path forward if they make peace with Israel.
The biblical prophecy is unfolding right before our very eyes. The people of Israel are returning to the Promised Land after 2,000 years of exile. But millions of Jews are still longing to come home. Bless Israel by supporting Keren Hayesod United Israel Appeal, the leading official fundraising organization for the State of Israel. Together, we can fulfill the prophecy of the Bible.
Let's bless Israel together.
To donate and get information, visit khisrael.org.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan El Rom.
And I'm Rebecca Rand, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. We'd like to wish all of our viewers around the world a Chag Sukkot Sameach, happy Feast of Tabernacles. Please join us next week for all of your Israel updates.